Commander Elena Martinez sat in her chair on the bridge of the UES Liberty, watching the stars drift past through the main view screen. The ship was on routine patrol in the Outer Rim territories, checking trade routes and monitoring for pirate activity. It was quiet work, but Elena preferred it that way. After 20 years in the Earth Defense Corps, she had seen enough action to last a lifetime. The communications console chirped softly. Lieutenant Lisa Park looked up from her station with a puzzled expression on her face. "Ma'am, I'm receiving a transmission on the emergency frequency. It's ... different. The signal patterns don't match." "Any Earth technology I've seen before?" Elena raised an eyebrow. "Different how?" "The encoding is completely alien. The computer is running translation protocols now, but this is going to take a few minutes." Lieutenant Commander Jake Sullivan walked over from the tactical station. He was Elena's second in command, a steady man from Texas who had served with her for 8 years. "Could be first contact, ma'am. The science teams back home have been saying we might run into other species out here eventually." Elena nodded. 3 months ago, Earth had received its first communication from something called the Galactic Cooperative Council. The message had been brief and formal, welcoming humanity to the wider galaxy and offering membership in their organization. Earth's leaders were still debating the offer, but meanwhile, ships like the Liberty continued their missions in human space. "Translation coming through now, ma'am," Park reported. The main screen flickered, and suddenly they were looking at something that was definitely not human. The being on the screen was tall and thin, with pale, almost transparent skin that seemed to glow faintly. Its eyes were large and dark, taking up much of its elongated face. When it spoke, its voice was soft and melodic, but filled with obvious distress. "I am Ambassador Veltar of the Galactic Cooperative Council. I am broadcasting this message on all emergency frequencies in the hope that someone, anyone, will respond to our desperate situation." Elena leaned forward in her chair. This was really happening. First contact with an alien species, and they were asking for help. Veltar continued. "For 3 years, the mining colonies on Kepler-4b have been under attack by the Zephyrian Syndicate. What began as a simple dispute over mining rights has become a campaign of terror. Thousands of innocent civilians have been killed or driven from their homes. Entire settlements have been burned to the ground." The screen showed images that made Elena's stomach turn. Destroyed buildings, refugee camps, filled with dozens of different alien species. Children with large eyes staring at the camera with expressions far too old for their faces. "Our peacekeeping forces have failed," Veltar said, his voice breaking. "Slightly. We have tried negotiation, mediation, economic sanctions. Nothing has worked. The Syndicate grows bolder with each passing day. Yesterday, they used chemical weapons against a refugee camp. 300 civilians died, including 50 children." Sullivan cursed under his breath. Elena felt her jaw tighten. She had seen war before, but attacking civilians with chemical weapons was something else entirely. "We call upon any who value peace and justice," Veltar pleaded. "We need protectors. We need those who can restore order without adding more violence to this world. Our people are dying while we debate and negotiate. Please, if anyone receives this message, we are begging for your help." The transmission ended, leaving the Bridge of the Liberty in silence. Elena stared at the star chart that had appeared on the screen, showing the location of the Kepler-442 system. "It was 3 weeks away at maximum burn, ma'am," Park said quietly. "There are 17 more messages in the queue, all from different species, all asking for the same thing: help." Elena stood up and walked to the view screen. Behind her, she could hear her crew talking in low voices. Chief Engineer Carol Wright had come up from the engine room. Sergeant Amy Rodriguez, leader of the ship's Marine contingent, stood near the elevator doors. "Jake," Elena said without turning around, "what do you think?" Sullivan was quiet for a moment. "Ma'am, they're asking for peacekeepers. That's not exactly what we trained for. We're military, not diplomats." Elena turned to face her senior staff. "Amy, what's your take?" Sergeant Rodriguez was a small woman from New Mexico, but Elena had seen her face down pirates and smugglers without flinching. "Ma'am, those images we just saw, It's not war, that's murder. If someone's got the ability to stop it and doesn't, well, that makes them part of the problem. Carol Wright nodded agreement. The Liberty's in good shape, ma'am. We've got full supplies and fuel for a month-long deployment. If we're going to do this, now's the time. Alina looked around at her crew. These were good people, all of them volunteers who had signed up to protect Earth and its interests. But the transmission they had just seen wasn't about Earth. It was about innocent people being slaughtered while the galaxy stood by and did nothing. Lisa, send a message to Fleet Command. Tell them we're responding to an emergency request for assistance from the Galactic Cooperative. Full details to follow. Yes, ma'am. Amy, I want your Marines ready for deployment. Full combat gear, but remember, we're supposed to be peacekeepers. Rodriguez smiled grimly. Understood, ma'am. We'll keep the peace real good. Carol, I need maximum burn to the Kepler 442 system. How fast can you get us there? The chief engineer was already running calculations on her tablet. 18 days if I push the engines hard. 16 if I push them past specifications. Do it. Jake, start pulling together everything we can find about this. Zephyrian Syndicate and the situation on Kepler 44b. I want to know what we're walking into. As her crew dispersed to carry out their orders, Alina remained on the bridge, staring at the star chart. She thought about the alien ambassador's words. They wanted peacekeepers, not warriors. They wanted someone to restore order without violence. Alina had grown up in Detroit during the gang wars of the 2150s. She had seen what happened when good people tried to negotiate with those who respected only force. Sometimes keeping the peace required being ready to break things and hurt people. The aliens didn't seem to understand that. They talked about negotiation and mediation while children died in chemical attacks. They wanted order restored without violence, as if the syndicate could be reasoned with after 3 years of murder and terror. Maybe that was how things worked in the galaxy. Maybe other species had found ways to solve problems without fighting. But Alina was human, and humans had learned long ago that evil only understood one language. Ma'am, Sullivan said, returning to the bridge. I've been thinking about what? You said to the crew about being peacekeepers instead of warriors. And, ma'am, seems to me that sometimes the best way to keep the peace is to make sure the people breaking it can't break it anymore. Alina smiled for the first time since receiving the transmission. Jake, I think you and I are going to get along just fine on this mission. As the Liberty's engines engaged and the ship jumped to faster than light speed, Alina couldn't shake the feeling that they were about to teach the galaxy a very important lesson about the difference between keeping the peace and maintaining order. The aliens had called for peacekeepers. That's exactly what they were getting. They just might be surprised by what human peacekeeping looked like. 16 days later, the EU's Liberty dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Kepler 442 system. What Alina saw through the view screen made her blood run cold. The space around the planet was filled with debris. Pieces of destroyed ships drifted. In the void, some still glowing from recent explosions, emergency beacons flashed red warnings in dozens of different alien languages that the computer was struggling to translate. Jesus Christ, Sullivan whispered from beside her chair. It's a graveyard out here. Lieutenant Park was working frantically at her communications station. Ma'am, I'm picking up distress signals from at least 30 different sources. Most of them are automated, but some are live transmissions. They're begging for rescue. Alina studied the tactical display. The planet below was covered in dark patches that could only be burn scars from orbital bombardment. Even from space, she could see that entire cities had been destroyed. Any sign of the Syndicate fleet? She asked Tom. Chief Petty Officer Mike Torres looked up from the sensor station. 3 ships in high orbit, ma'am. They're broadcasting warnings to stay away from the planet. The computer identifies them as Zephyrian Syndicate vessels based on their energy signatures. Alina felt her jaw tighten. 3 ships. 3 ships were all it took to terrorize an entire world while the galaxy stood by and did nothing. Park called out, I'm receiving a transmission from the surface. It's from Captain Zethka of the Cooperative Defense Forces. The main screen flickered, and Alina found herself looking at her second alien contact. Captain Zethka was clearly a different species from Ambassador Veltar. He was reptilian, with dark green scales and 4 arms. His face showed obvious exhaustion and stress. "Human vessel," Zethka said, his voice coming through the universal translator with a slight delay. "I am Captain Zethka." "Commander of what?" "Remains of the cooperative forces on Kepler 44b. We are grateful that someone finally responded to our calls for help. But I must warn you, the situation here has deteriorated far beyond standard peacekeeping protocols." Alina leaned forward. "Captain, this is Commander Martinez of the Earth Defense Corps. What's your current status?" Zethka's forearms moved in what might have been the alien equivalent of a shrug. "Commander, we are down to fewer than 200. Combat-effective troops scattered across 4 defensive positions. The Syndicate has approximately 5,000 fighters on the planet, plus air support and heavy weapons. They control 90% of the surface." "What about civilians?" "Approximately 40,000 refugees are sheltering in our defensive zones. Another 100,000 are believed to be in Syndicate-controlled areas. The enemy has been using them as human shields," and Zethka paused, his reptilian features showing what Alina was learning to recognize as distress. 3 days ago, they began executing civilian leaders in the public squares. They broadcast the killings on all frequencies as a warning to anyone who might resist them. Sullivan cursed under his breath. Alina felt something cold and hard settle in her stomach. Public executions. These weren't soldiers fighting a war. They were terrorists, pure and simple. "Captain," Alina said carefully, "we're here to help, but I need to understand something. You said this has gone beyond standard peacekeeping protocols. What exactly does that mean?" Zethka, Sludge eyes focused on her through the screen. "Commander, the Galactic Cooperative operates under very strict rules of engagement. We are required to attempt negotiation before any use of force. We must provide multiple warnings before engaging enemy positions. We cannot use weapons that cause excessive collateral damage. We must offer quarter to surrendering enemies." Alina nodded. "Those sound like reasonable rules." "They are reasonable when dealing with reasonable opponents," Zethka replied. "The Syndicate ignores all attempts at communication. They execute prisoners. They use civilian populations as shields. They have turned this planet into a killing field, while we follow protocols designed for honorable warfare." Alina looked around her bridge at her senior staff. All of them were listening intently to the conversation. She could see the same cold anger in their faces that she felt in her own chest. "Captain," she said, "how many Syndicate troops did you say were planet-side?" "Approximately 5,000, plus support personnel." Alina turned to Sergeant Rodriguez, who had been standing quietly near the tactical station. "Amy, how many Marines do we have aboard?" 43, ma'am, plus support crew." Alina looked back at the screen. "Captain Zethka, we're going to need landing coordinates for a secure zone. We'll be deploying troops within 6 hours." Zethka's reptilian features showed surprise. "Commander, with respect, 43 soldiers cannot possibly make a significant difference against 5,000. Perhaps you should call for reinforcements from your fleet," Captain Alina said calmly. "We are the reinforcements." "Those coordinates?" After the transmission ended, Alina called a meeting in the ship's briefing room. Her senior staff gathered around the central table, while she pulled up the tactical information they had gathered about the planet. "All right, people, here's what we're dealing with. 5,000 hostiles armed with energy weapons and aircraft. 40,000 civilians in friendly zones. Another 100,000 in enemy territory. The local forces are down to 200. Effective troops following rules of engagement that the enemy ignores completely." She paused and looked around the table. "I'm not going to lie to you. This is going to be ugly. The Syndicate has been terrorizing civilians for 3 years, while the Cooperative tried to negotiate with them. That ends now." Sergeant Rodriguez raised her hand. "Ma'am, what are our rules of engagement?" Alina was quiet for a moment. The Cooperative's rules made sense for dealing with civilized opponents, but the Syndicate had forfeited any claim to civilized treatment when they started. "Executing civilians. Amy, anyone who fires on our troops or threatens civilian populations is a hostile target. Anyone who surrenders will be treated according to the Geneva Conventions. Anyone who uses civilians as shields will be eliminated with extreme prejudice. Wright spoke up from across the table. Ma'am, the cooperative forces might have problems with our methods. They seem pretty concerned about following their protocols, Lena nodded. Carol, I understand their concerns, but those protocols haven't saved a single civilian life in 3 years. We're here to stop a genocide, not to make the galaxy feel good about itself. Lieutenant Park looked uncomfortable. Ma'am, shouldn't we try to coordinate with Captain Zethka? Work within their system. Elena looked around the table at her crew. These were good people who had signed up to defend Earth and its interests. Now she was asking them to fight and possibly die for aliens they had never met on a world they had never seen, against enemies who followed no rules at all. Lisa, I want you to maintain constant communication with the cooperative forces. Keep them informed of our movements and intentions. But understand this, we're not here to follow their rules. We're here to stop the killing. She stood up and walked to the view screen, showing the scarred planet below. People. 3 days ago, the Syndicate executed civilian leaders in public. Squares and broadcast the murders across the planet. They're using chemical weapons against refugee camps. They're holding 100,000 innocent people hostage. Lena turned back to face her crew. The galaxy called for peacekeepers. They're going to get them. But they might be surprised to learn that sometimes keeping the peace means breaking things and hurting people. Sullivan nodded grimly. Ma'am, when do we deploy? Lena checked her. Watch. Prep begins in 1 hour. We go planet-side at 0600 ship time. Amy, I want your Marines ready for immediate combat operations. This isn't going to be a police action. As her crew filed out to prepare for deployment, Alina remained in the briefing room staring at the tactical display. Somewhere on that planet, children were hiding in bomb shelters while terrorists hunted their parents. Somewhere down there, good people were dying while evil people celebrated. The galaxy might not approve of what was about to happen. But Alina had stopped caring about galactic approval the moment she saw those execution broadcasts. The Syndicate wanted to play by no rules at all. They were about to learn that humans had been playing that game for a very long time, and they were very, very good at it. The first human dropship touched down on Kepler 4-4 to be at exactly 0600 ship time. Sergeant Amy Rodriguez was the first boot on the ground, her rifle already scanning for threats as her Marines spread out to secure the landing zone. The air smelled of smoke and something else that made her stomach turn. Rodriguez to liberty. She spoke into her unit. Landing zone secure, beginning patrol operations. Captain Zethka was waiting for them at the cooperative command post, a hastily constructed bunker made from the ruins of what had once been a school. The reptilian officers for arms moved nervously as he watched the humans unload their equipment. Sergeant Rodriguez, he said through his translator, I must express my concerns about your deployment. My scouts report heavy Syndicate activity. In this sector, it would be safer to remain within our defensive perimeter until we can coordinate a proper response. Amy looked around at the refugee camp that surrounded the command post. Alien families huddled in makeshift shelters, their eyes filled with the hollow look of people who had seen too much death. Children clung to their parents, flinching at every sound. With respect, Captain, Amy said, we didn't come here to hide in bunkers. My orders are to eliminate hostile forces and secure civilian populations. Zethka's reptilian features showed confusion. But surely you will follow standard peacekeeping protocols. Warning shots, demands for surrender, minimal force. Amy hefted her M4 rifle and checked her ammunition. Captain, those protocols might work fine when you're dealing with soldiers who care about honor and rules. But these Syndicate bastards have been murdering children for 3 years. They've had their warnings. An hour later, Staff Sergeant Bobby Chen was crouched behind a boulder 3 kilometers outside the refugee camp, watching a Syndicate patrol approach through his rifle scope. The enemy soldiers were tall, insectoid creatures with chitinous armor. That looked impressive but primitive compared to human military technology. Chentu Rodriguez, he whispered into his cum. I've got 12 tangos moving toward the refugee camp. They're armed with plasma rifles and what looks like some kind of explosive device? Rules of engagement? came Amy's voice through his earpiece. Bobby watched through his scope as one of the aliens pulled out what was clearly a recording device and began speaking into it. He had seen enough of the Syndicate's broadcasts to know what that meant. They were planning to record another atrocity. Hostile intent confirmed, Bobby replied. Engaging. The M240 machine gun opened fire with a sound like thunder. The Syndicate patrol never knew what hit them. Plasma rifles designed for intimidating civilians were useless against soldiers who had trained for this their entire lives. The engagement lasted exactly 47 seconds. Rodriguez, this is Chen. 12 tangos down, no friendly casualties. These guys fight like they've never faced real opposition. Across the continent, Corporal Danny Wright was discovering the same thing. His fire team had been sent to evacuate a cooperative refugee camp when Syndicate aircraft appeared on the horizon. The alien civilians began screaming and running in panic. Right, this is Captain Zethka, came the voice over his radio. I am tracking 3 Syndicate bombers approaching your position. You are not authorized to engage aerial targets. Our protocols require that we attempt communication first. Danny looked at the terror in the eyes of the alien children around him, then at the approaching aircraft. He could see the bomb bay doors opening on the lead bomber. Captain, those birds are loaded and heading straight for civilians, Danny said as he shouldered his FIM-9 2 Stinger missile launcher. Corporal Wright, you must stand down. Cannot escalate the situation without first attempting dialogue. The first Syndicate bomber exploded in a brilliant fireball 2 kilometers out. Danny was already tracking the second aircraft as debris from the first rained down around them. Right. What have you done? Zethka's voice cracked with shock. My job, sir, Danny replied as the second bomber caught a missile in its port engine and spiraled into the ground. The third bomber turned and fled at maximum speed. Communication attempted and received loud and clear, Captain. Message appeared. To be understood. Back at the command post, Captain Zethka stared at his tactical display in disbelief. In less than 2 hours, the humans had eliminated more Syndicate forces than his troops had managed in the past 6 months. Red symbols representing enemy positions were disappearing from his screen one by one. Commander Martinez, he said, as Elena's image appeared on his communication screen, your forces are extremely effective. Elena was watching the same tactical display from orbit. Each human unit was systematically destroying Syndicate positions that had terrorized the planet for years. They're doing their jobs, Captain. But this level of violence, we had hoped for a peaceful resolution. Elena gestured toward the refugee camps visible on her screen, where human medics were already treating wounded civilians. Captain, peace isn't the absence of violence. Peace is what happens when good people are willing to use violence against those who prey on the innocent. Zethka was quiet for a long moment. Round him, his staff officers watched the humans work with expressions of awe and growing unease. Your species has a very different approach to these matters. Yes, Elena said simply. We do. By midday, Sergeant Rodriguez had established a forward operating base in what had been a Syndicate stronghold just hours earlier. Her Marines were treating wounded civilians and distributing supplies while maintaining defensive positions around the Senator. A group of alien refugees approached her cautiously. Their leader, a tall being with blue skin and large eyes, spoke in halting English. Human soldier, the alien said, we want to thank you. For 3 years, we lived in fear. The Syndicate came to our homes, took our food, hurt our children. Cooperative forces, they tried to help, but they could not stop the killing. Amy nodded, checking her rifle as she spoke. That's why we're here. But will you stay? The Syndicate, they have many soldiers. When you leave, they will come back. Amy looked around at the other refugees who had gathered to listen. Their faces showed hope for the first time in years, but also fear that this reprieve would be temporary. Listen to me, she said firmly. The Syndicate is done here. We're not just going to chase them away. We're going to make sure they can never come back. The alien's large eyes widened. You will destroy them completely? Every last one who doesn't surrender? Amy confirmed. This is our world now until every civilian is safe and every terrorist is dead or captured. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Tony Martinez was leading his assault team through the ruins of what had been the planet's capital city. The Syndicate had turned it into a fortress with heavy weapons positions and slave labor camps hidden throughout the rubble. Martinez to all units, he spoke into his cum as his team moved through the abandoned streets. I'm seeing evidence of systematic execution sites, mass graves, torture chambers, the works. These aren't soldiers, they're war criminals. Elena's voice came back immediately. Understood, Lieutenant? Document everything, but don't let it slow you down. Priority is still securing civilians and eliminating hostile forces. Tony watched through his rifle scope as a group of Syndicate soldiers herded alien prisoners toward what was clearly an execution site. Ma'am, I've got hostiles preparing to execute civilians. Request permission to engage. Permission granted. Save those people. Human assault team moved like ghosts through the rubble. The Syndicate soldiers were so focused on their helpless prisoners that they never saw death coming for them. By the time the shooting stopped, 12 terrorists were dead and 30 civilians were free. As evening fell on the first day of human peacekeeping operations, the tactical situation had changed completely. Syndicate forces that had dominated the planet for 3 years were in full retreat. Their communication networks were down, their supply lines were cut, their leadership was either dead or running for their lives. Captain Zethka stood in his command bunker, staring at a tactical display that showed human forces in control of positions his own troops had never even attempted to assault. Commander Martinez, he said as Elena's image appeared on his screen, I must ask, ... Is this standard procedure for human military forces? Elena thought about the question. Captain, my people come from a world where everything tries to kill. You, the weather, the animals, the geology, even some of the plants. We learned early that if you want to protect something, you have to be willing to destroy anything that threatens it. Zethka's forearms gestured in what might have been confusion or distress, but surely there must be rules. Limits? Some consideration. For the rights of combatants? Elena's expression hardened. Captain, the Syndicate forfeited any rights when they started murdering children. My people are following rules. The same rules we'd follow if someone invaded Earth and started executing our families. As night fell over Kepler 44b, the survivors of the Syndicate huddled in their remaining strongholds, sending desperate messages to their fleet in orbit. For the first time in 3 years, they were the ones who were afraid. The humans had come to keep the peace, and they were keeping it in the only way they knew how. By the end of the first week, the Zephyrian Syndicate was in complete retreat. What had been a 3-year campaign of terror was reduced to scattered groups of desperate fighters hiding in caves and abandoned buildings. The galaxy watched in stunned silence as news feeds from Kepler 44b showed a transformation that no one had thought possible. Captain? Zethka stood beside Commander Martinez in what had once been the planet's primary medical facility. The building had been destroyed by Syndicate bombing 6 months earlier. Human engineering teams were already rebuilding it with help from alien refugees. The sound of construction mixed with the voices of children playing nearby. Commander, Martinez Zethka said, his forearms hanging at his sides, I must confess that I am struggling to understand what I have witnessed this week. Elena watched Corporal Maria Santos teaching a group of young alien children how to use a simple mirror to signal for help. It was basic survival training that might save their lives if something like this ever happened again. Nearby, Sergeant Rodriguez was sharing her field rations with a family of displaced civilians, while her squad maintained watch. What specifically concerns you, Captain? Elena asked. Your methods? Your efficiency? The complete destruction of enemy forces. In 7 days, you have accomplished what we could not in 3 years. Elena turned to face the reptilian officer. Captain, what bothers you more? Is that we succeeded, or how we succeeded? Before Zethka could answer, a new voice interrupted their conversation. That is precisely the question we have come to ask. They turned to see Ambassador Veltar, approaching with a group Elena didn't recognize. The beings wore formal robes that marked them as members of the Galactic Cooperative's High Council. Elena counted representatives from at least 6 different species. Ambassador, Alina said carefully. I wasn't expecting a diplomatic delegation, nor were we expecting this, replied a tall being with crystalline features that caught the light. Like a prism. I am Counselor Thexan of the High Council. We came to investigate reports of excessive force being used by the human peacekeeping mission. Alina felt her jaw tighten.
Counselor.
In the past 7 days, my forces have eliminated organized resistance, secured refugee camps, restored basic services to 4 major population centers, established medical aid stations throughout the affected regions. Civilian casualties during our operations, 0. Syndicate forces eliminated, approximately 4,000. Syndicate forces captured, approximately 800. A bird-like being with bright feathers stepped forward. The concern, Commander, is not your results, but your methods. The Syndicate survivors report that your forces fight with unprecedented brutality. Sergeant Rodriguez, who had been listening from nearby, approached with several of her Marines. With respect, Counselor, there's nothing brutal about efficiency. We gave every hostile force the opportunity to surrender. Those who chose to fight discovered that humans have been perfecting the art of warfare for 10,000 years. Another council member, this one resembling a large insect with compound eyes, buzzed as it spoke. But surely peaceful solutions could have been found. The Syndicate could have been reasoned with, given proper incentives. Alina gestured toward a nearby medical station where human doctors worked alongside alien physicians. The patients were survivors of chemical attacks, many of them children. Counselor, the Syndicate had 3 years to show reason. They chose to execute civilian leaders and use chemical weapons against children instead. Counselor Thexan's crystalline features shifted in what Alina was learning to recognize as discomfort. Commander, your approach represents a fundamental departure from established galactic norms. The use of overwhelming force, the targeting of enemy leadership, the complete destruction of opposing forces. These tactics have not been seen in this galaxy for over 1,000 years, Alina replied simply. Maybe that's why you've had problems like the Syndicate in the first place. The insectoid counselor buzzed angrily. You cannot simply solve every problem with violence. What message does this send to other potential aggressors? What precedent does this set? Lieutenant Commander Sullivan, who had been standing quietly behind Alina, stepped forward. Counselor, seems to me the message is pretty clear. If you start murdering civilians and using chemical weapons against children, someone's going to come along and stop you permanently. And at what cost? Demanded the bird-like counselor. Your species has been in contact with the galaxy for mere months, and already you're reshaping our understanding of conflict resolution through brute force. Alina looked around at the reconstruction work happening throughout the facility. Alien refugees were working alongside human engineers to rebuild their world. Former enemies who had surrendered were being treated according to human military law, not executed as the Syndicate had done to their prisoners. Counselor Kyrith, she said, reading the name from his identification badge, let me ask you something. How many innocent people died while the galaxy spent 3 years trying to negotiate with terrorists? The bird-like being's feathers ruffled. That is not a fair characterization of our efforts, isn't it? Alina pulled up a holographic display showing casualty statistics. 47,000 civilian deaths in 3 years. 15 chemical attacks on refugee camps. Over 200 public executions broadcast across the planet. All while the Galactic Cooperative followed protocols designed for civilized opponents. Ambassador Valtar, who had been quiet throughout the exchange, finally spoke. Commander Martinez, while we are grateful for your intervention, we must address the broader implications of your actions. Other species are watching. Some see your efficiency as a model to follow. Others see it as a threat to galactic stability. Alina nodded. I understand their concerns, Ambassador. But here's what I want you to understand. Every human soldier who served on this mission volunteered to risk their life for people they'd never met, belonging to species they'd never heard of, on a world they'd never seen. We didn't come here for resources or territory or glory. Came because it was the right thing to do. She paused, looking at each council member in turn. You want to know what message we're sending? The message is simple. If you prey on the innocent, If you murder children, if you use terror as a weapon, then humans will find you. And when we do, your choice will be simple: surrender or die. Counselor Thaksan's crystalline form shifted uncomfortably. Such absolutism troubles many in the galaxy, Commander. What happens when your species decides that some other group deserves the same treatment? Elena's expression hardened. Counselor, that question assumes we're the aggressors here. We're not.
Oh.
We responded to a call for help from people who were being slaughtered while the galaxy debated proper protocols. If that makes us dangerous in your eyes, then maybe you need to examine why you're more concerned about our methods than you were about the Syndicate's victims. Staff Sergeant Chen approached from the communications center. Ma'am, priority message from Fleet Command. Alina excused herself and walked to a private area to take the transmission. Admiral Sarah Johnson's image appeared on the portable display. Alina, congratulations on a successful mission. I need to warn you about the political situation developing here. The Galactic Cooperative has been in emergency session since news of Kepler 44 to be broke. What kind of emergency session, Admiral? It's the kind where half of them want to recruit us for every peacekeeping mission in the galaxy, and the other half want to classify humanity as a potential threat to galactic stability. Apparently, our success has some people worried about what humans might do if we ever decided to stop being the good guys. Alina looked out at the bustling activity around. The medical facility. Human and alien workers labored side by side to rebuild what the Syndicate had destroyed. Children who had hidden in terror for 3 years were playing in the streets again. Admiral, respectfully, I think that's exactly the right thing for them to worry about. Alina, be careful. There are already calls for restrictions on human military deployments. Some council members are proposing that human forces should only be allowed to operate under direct cooperative oversight. Alina felt her anger rising. Admiral, with respect, the cooperative had 3 years of oversight here. The result was 47,000 dead civilians. If they want to restrict our deployments, that's their choice. But they'd better be ready to explain to the next group of genocide victims why galactic protocols are more important than saving lives. After ending the transmission, Alina returned to the council delegation. They were huddled together, speaking in low voices that stopped. When she approached, "Have you reached any conclusions, counselors?" Now Counselor Thaksan spoke for the group. "Commander, we acknowledge the effectiveness of your intervention. However, the methods employed raise serious questions about humanity's role in galactic affairs. We will be recommending that future human deployments be subject to cooperative oversight and approval." Alina smiled coldly. "Counselor, that's certainly you're right. But understand this. The next time innocent people are being slaughtered while you debate proper procedures, don't expect humans to wait for your permission. To do the right thing." 3 months later, Alina stood in the rebuilt council chambers of New Geneva, watching as Ambassador Veltar formally transferred administrative control of the colony back to local governance. The ceremony was being broadcast across the galaxy, marking the first successful human peacekeeping operation and making waves far beyond the Kepler 442 system. The planet was completely transformed. Where refugee camps had once dotted the landscape, new settlements now stood built to human defensive standards. Where fear had ruled for 3 years, alien children played in parks protected by locally trained security forces, equipped with human weapons and tactics. The Zephyrian Syndicate had been completely eliminated, its leadership either dead or facing trial for war crimes. The Galactic Cooperative formally recognizes the successful completion of Mission Kepler 44-B. Veltar announced to the assembled crowd of representatives from dozens of species. The human peacekeeping force will be withdrawing to allow local authorities to resume full governance. Alina stepped forward to address the crowd. Many faces in the audience were familiar now. Civilians she had helped rescue, cooperative officers she had worked alongside. Even some former Syndicate prisoners who had surrendered and been treated according to human military law rather than executed. "Before we leave," Alina said, her voice carrying across the chamber, "I want to make something clear to everyone here and everyone watching across the galaxy. We didn't come here to conquer or occupy. We came because people were suffering, and we had the ability to stop that suffering." She paused, looking out at the mixture of alien faces. Some showed gratitude. Others still seemed uncertain about these aggressive newcomers to galactic society, but all were listening intently. The galaxy seemed surprised by our methods. You've called us aggressive, brutal, excessive, but here's what I want you to understand. Every human soldier who served on this mission volunteered to risk their life for people they'd never met, belonging to species they'd never heard of, on a world they'd never seen. Alina gestured toward Sergeant Rodriguez, who stood with her Marines at the back of the chamber. All of them wore the decorations of the Galactic Cooperative's highest honor for valor, awards that had been created specifically for their service. We didn't come here for resources or territory or glory. We came because it was the right thing to do. Because when someone calls for help, humans answer, a voice from the crowd called out. It was Dr. Yenthera, a physician who had worked alongside human medics in the refugee camps. Commander Martinez, many of us want to know, will humans continue to answer such calls? Alina looked toward the back of the chamber, where Captain Zethka stood with his remaining officers. The reptilian commander had become something of a student of human military doctrine over the past 3 months, trying to understand how 43 Marines had accomplished what his army of thousands could not. Doctor, that depends on whether the galaxy wants our help. We've heard that some council members think humanity should be restricted, that our operations should be subject to cooperative oversight and approval. Murmurs ran through the crowd. The political debate over humanity's role had been front page news across the galaxy for weeks. Sergeant Rodriguez stepped forward. Ma'am, permission to speak? Alina nodded. People keep asking us why we fight so hard, Rodriguez said, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber's acoustics. It's not complicated. Come from a world where you fight or you die. The strong protect the weak, or there's nobody left to protect. The galaxy seems to think that makes us dangerous. She looked around at the crowd of alien faces. Maybe it does. But here's the thing. We're only dangerous to people who hurt the innocent. If that scares you, maybe you should ask yourself why. An elderly alien near the front of the crowd, someone Alina recognized as a survivor from one of the first refugee camps they had liberated, stood up slowly. Human soldiers, he said, in heavily accented English. My family lived in fear for 3 years. My grandson was killed in a chemical attack. My daughter was taken by syndicate raiders. Lena felt the chamber grow quiet as the old being continued. The cooperative forces tried to help us. They followed their rules, sent us supplies, negotiated with our killers. But they could not stop the dying. You stopped the dying in 7 days. The old alien looked directly at Alina. I do not care if the galaxy thinks you are too violent. I care that my remaining grandchildren can sleep without fear. If the council wants to restrict human soldiers, they should come here and explain to the children why galactic politics are more important than their lives. The chamber erupted in discussion. Alina could see alien civilians nodding in agreement. While some of the diplomatic representatives looked uncomfortable, Ambassador Veltar raised his hand for silence. The matter of humanity's future role in galactic affairs remains under discussion by the High Council. However, I can announce that 17 different systems have formally requested human peacekeeping assistance in the past month. Alina raised an eyebrow. 17. The requests range from piracy suppression to territorial disputes to situations similar to what we faced here. It appears that word of human military effectiveness has spread rapidly through diplomatic channels. Lieutenant Commander Sullivan, who had been standing quietly beside Alina, spoke up. Ambassador, what's the nature of these requests? Are we talking about actual threats to civilian populations or just political disputes? Veltar consulted his tablet. A mixture of both, I'm afraid. 3 involve organized criminal syndicates attacking civilian populations. 5 are territorial disputes that have escalated beyond normal diplomatic resolution. The remainder are requests for training and advisory support for local security forces. Alina felt a familiar weight settling on her shoulders. Each of those requests represented real people in real danger, but also the potential for more political controversy as humanity's methods clash with galactic norms. Commander, came a voice from the crowd. Alina turned to see Councillor Thexon entering the chamber with a small delegation. The crystalline being's features were unreadable, but his posture suggested official business. Alina replied, carefully. I thought the High Council was still debating humanity's role in galactic affairs. We are, Dexan said as he approached the podium. However, recent events have forced us to accelerate our discussions. 3 days ago, the hegemony of worlds declared war on the Tau Ceti colonies. Yesterday, they began orbital bombardment of civilian targets. Alina felt her blood run cold. Casualties? Preliminary estimates suggest over 10,000 dead in the first 24 hours. Colonies have requested immediate assistance from any cooperative member willing to provide it. The chamber fell silent. Alina could see the same thoughts reflected in the faces around her. Another genocide beginning while the galaxy debated proper procedures. What has the cooperative response been? Alina asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. The High Council is meeting an emergency session to discuss appropriate diplomatic measures. Several member species have offered to mediate negotiations with the hegemony. We expect to have a preliminary response plan. Within the next week, Lena looked at Thexon with barely controlled anger. Counselor, 10,000 civilians died yesterday while you scheduled meetings. How many more will die while you debate, Commander? Please understand that the hegemony is a major power with significant military capabilities. Any response must be carefully considered to avoid escalating the conflict. Alina turned to Sullivan. Jake, how long to reach the Tau Ceti system? For days at maximum burn, ma'am. Alina looked back at Counselor Thexon. Counselor, you can debate and negotiate for as long as you want. But we're leaving for Tau Ceti in 6 hours. Thexon's crystalline features shifted rapidly. Commander, you cannot simply deploy human forces without cooperative authorization. The political ramifications would be enormous. Lena smiled grimly. Counselor, the political ramifications of doing nothing while civilians are murdered from orbit will be a lot worse. At least from humanity's perspective. As Alina walked toward the exit, Sergeant Rodriguez fell into step beside her. Ma'am, what are our orders? Same as always, Amy. We go where people need help, and we stop the bad guys from hurting the good. Guys, behind them, the chamber erupted into heated discussion as alien diplomats realized that humanity had just declared its independence from galactic bureaucracy. Alina didn't look back. She had work to do. 6 hours later, the UES Liberty jumped to hyperspace, bound for Tau Ceti, and another opportunity to show the galaxy what human peacekeeping looked like. In the ship's ready room, Alina reviewed the tactical situation while her senior staff prepared for their next mission. The galaxy might not approve of their methods, but Alina had stopped caring about galactic approval. Somewhere in the Tau Ceti system, innocent people were dying while politicians debated. That was going to stop one way or another? The call had been for peacekeepers, and peacekeepers had answered. The galaxy was just going to have to learn to live with what that meant.